Hi, I'm Adam Kunzmiller with RPG TV at Gen Con 2015, and I'm joined here by Monica Valentinelli.
Hello.
With Margaret Weiss Productions, and we're here to talk about the Firefly role-playing game. Ta-da! So what can you tell me about the Firefly role-playing game?
So the Firefly role-playing game is pretty interesting because in 2005, Margaret Weiss Productions put out another game called the Serenity RPG. And the Serenity RPG used a more traditional-based system called Cortex Classic.
Okay.
So in a traditional-based system, you would have like a damage track and all that sorts of rules. In this game, this is only based on the TV show. It's a completely different license.
Okay.
It's really kind of fascinating how that works because a lot of fans didn't realize that Universal put out the movie.
Oh, and that they were completely held by different people.
Different. So there's different art, and there's a lot of setting differences and even logo differences between the two. So from a business standpoint, they're two separate things, but from a universe continuity standpoint, they're
right.
So this uses a more narrative-based system, which means that it uses Cortex Plus, and in Cortex Plus, it's very player-driven. So the damage track would actually be through the complications that are on the table instead of a traditional damage track.
Okay.
So in a narrative-based game, the GM is more the facilitator.
Right.
So I would give the players a job, and then I would say, so it sounds like you have some options, like trying to do that leading, trying to get them to...
Trying to keep them moving along.
Like what would you like to do? And then they tell me what they want to do, and I take cues off of them.
Right.
Managing characters and settings and other ships. And that's how the episode kind of unfolds.
So when you say it's a lot more player-driven, do you get the thing where it's like the player's like, well, what does it look like? And the GM is like, well, what do you think it looks like? Like
a little bit of that. So what I generally do is we usually run the adventures in scenes, and each scene is a different location. So I cut down on a lot of that by giving them some description up front. So if you've seen the show, like in a television show, there's always that teaser, that prelude. That's usually the introduction to the job or something to get the camaraderie on the on the crew. After that's done and we get all that done, I go cut to commercial.
Oh, cool.
So when I do cut to commercial, I manage all of the rules for the players, give them a little bit of a downtime and some recap. And when I kick off the next scene, they're automatically in the next scene.
So you don't have to worry about that kind of awkward transition that sometimes happens in a game. Where
There's
now
transition.
We're just sitting around twiddling our thumbs waiting for something exciting to happen.
We're sitting around twiddling our thumbs, going to talk about whether or not we get off the ship for an hour or how we're going to fly from this system to the other. There's none of that.
That would be good for my group. We get caught in a lot of those, what are we going to do for an hour conversations. So, cool.
And usually that's when I shoot at them. Because things don't go smooth, right? I mean, and it's Firefly. So it's very much a push-pull relationship and very character-focused. So in the game, you can have a lot of player versus player interactions. So if Jane's fighting with Simon, like Simon's trying to shoot him with the hypodermic needle.
Yeah, we'll wait for the enthusiastic Gen Con announcer. Oh, sure.
Awesome.
So you were saying?
So it's kind of a push-pull relationship. So like Jane and Simon could roll a contest together. It's called raising and setting the stakes. The defender always goes first to see whether or not Simon sticks him with a hypodermic needle.
Okay. Nice.
And if the players roll, it's known as a 1. Okay, so if you roll your dice pool, and your dice pool, you have to roll a minimum of 2 dice.
Okay.
The players, when they start the game, are already powerful. They already can do a lot of stuff. So you always roll an attribute and a skill. So you have more dice that you can roll, the advantage being that the more dice you roll, the higher the total you can get. So you would roll an attribute. I'm gonna flip you to a character. How's that?
That sounds great.
That sounds great. So I'm gonna flip you to...
While you're doing that, so when players are playing this, are they essentially playing analogs of the characters that they're familiar with as kinds of archetypes? So they're all, in a smuggling operation together, or is it also, well, I want to play the bad guys, or I want to play this kind of thing?
We did 3 types of character creation for this.
Okay.
And we were very fortunate to have the ability to kind of expand the setting. The core book is the most true to the setting, and then as we go in the line, we can expand more of the setting. But we have the main characters, which is fantastic for teaching the show because you don't need to I don't really know how to play my character.
Yeah, it's great to be able to come to the
there.
role-playing table with a very clear understanding of who your character is.
Everybody knows who Kaylee is, so you can figure out who to play right away. And then we have 24 archetypes, which are secondary characters that might be found throughout the verse. A little bit of a customization gets you some ideas on what you might want to play. And then what's really awesome is then we have original character creation. So whatever you want to do, you can customize it, but I timed them and I said we have to do short character creation. Right. Oh my gosh, if I spend an hour on characters, at that point you've already lost me. So it's 10 minutes or less.
Great. And so in this book we have the core book, which has all of the stuff you need and kind of the base, establishing the setting in the world. Mm-hmm. What is it that we have here in this Ghosts in the Black?
So in Ghosts in the Black, I brought the newest book in the line. So we've kind of gone further from the core book. Ghosts in the Black is a campaign session designed by Robin Laws, who you know from doing all of the work at Pelgrane Press, and he's done a lot of other great. And he designed the story for this and wrote up the characters. There's 5 different adventures that can be run concurrently or as part of a full season, and it has an overarching story plot. Plus, we've got characters that interconnect with one another and reveals that happen at different points. And he based his idea, it's pretty awesome, on the idea of a ghost ship from the Unification War. So there's this legendary battleship that's out there. Somewhere in the black. It's got all of these rumors about it. And that's kind of how it starts as you do your first job. And then there's interconnected pieces and different ways that people intersect with that mystery.
Cool. So from a pure system point of view, what sort of things are happening in here? It sounds like you're rolling different types of dice based on how good you are, how proficient, looking from the character sheet, combining that with a skill, and then just hitting a target?
So what happens in a normal contest is you always roll the attribute and the skill. You may roll a skill specialty, and then you roll what's known as a distinction, and you may roll a signature asset. And if you create an asset, I'll get to that very briefly in just a second, you can also add that to your dice pool.
Okay.
So typically speaking, you're rolling about 4 or 5 dice, the players are. The GM should roll somewhere between 3, but they can also go higher depending upon, how many antagonists they're rolling, if they're little red shirt extras or whatever. Right. So the defender goes first. So say that Jane is defending himself from getting shot by Simon's hypodermic needle. So what he would do is, say Jane is going to try to intimidate him. So he's going to do it very socially. Right. So he would roll his social attributes, he would roll his influence die, he would get an extra die for his intimidation.
This is what he's good at.
Because this is what he's good at. He's going to do it in a crude way, and he's not going to brandish Vera to really threaten him, but he's just going to try to muscle in and get him. So he would roll that first, and then you would take the 2 highest die and you would set them aside. And then that's the target number that Simon has to be. Okay? Now, in Firefly, things never go smooth.
Of course.
So if Jane or Simon roll, they're known as jinxes. If either of them roll a 1 on their dice,
On any of the dice,
the GM can cackle with mad glee because they would get plot points, which allow them to do lots of really cool things in the game. And that's the bad luck that happens in the table. So say that happens. Say that Jane, he succeeds, but he gets a little bit of bad luck, right? So the bad luck might be River is plotting revenge, D6. So anytime that comes into play in the story, the players can take that die and add that to their die pool.
Cool.
And then that die keeps going up as more jinxes are rolled. Now I mentioned plot points. So one of the cool plot points things that you can do is if you beat the target number by 5 or more as a player, you get a big damn hero die.
Nice. All right.
And you can bank that for later, and then you get to spend a plot point to bring that into your pool. So there's times in the game, especially as you get later into your episode, as you've been accumulating these plot points and there's complications flowing on the table, that you can lose at first, but then be like, no, I don't lose. I'm going to spend plot
That's
points.
right.
And I'm going to add this extra dice to my pool, and now I've won.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you again for taking us through that. And once again, that was Firefly, the role-playing game.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks.
Awesome.